Welcome to the first episode of Now, Nerd Out With. And my first guest ever is Dr. Lawrence Xu-Nan, Egyptologist, academic, MP, absolute massive anime fan. Is there anything I'm missing?
No, I think that pretty much, other than the gamer part, I think that pretty much captures my personality, in a line. Yeah.
For you, as somebody who is obviously very academic and has a really intense workload as a politician, how does pop culture fit into your views of the world? Like how does it shape what you do and how you unwind?
Um, I think in a lot of ways, pop culture, and particularly when you're looking at things like gaming, when you're looking at things like sci-fi, in many ways, when it first started, it's a very inclusive environment, right? Because you are kind of imagining a world that could be. And I think in many ways for pop culture, there's a lot of really good one-liners and also kind of phrases that people could be using in a political sphere as well. And I remember this thing that was in the US, and this is many years ago, when I think one of their candidates plagiarized the lyrics to Pokemon the movie 2000, and Jon Stewart got it wrong. Jon Stewart said returns, and it was not the first movie. It was actually Pokemon
Mhm.
movie 2000. And the main song for that, the line goes, life can be a challenge, life can seem impossible. It's never easy when so much is on the line, but you can make a difference. That you can set, I think you can set things right. But anyway, they use it as a genuine political speech. And I thought that was a good example of how things could be intersecting. But I think for me, I game a lot if I'm
Mhm.
unwinding. I've I've recently had a relapse, and I haven't touched World of Warcraft in 8 years. But then with Midnight came out, and I kind of gone back to playing Midnight, and I realized, much to my horror, that my main character has just turned 18 and is now eligible
Oh,
to drink and vote.
oh my God. That's actually kind of weird because there seems to be a longevity to a lot of pop culture items, like a lot of pop culture titles. This is Star Trek's 60th anniversary, for example. So that's been around a fairly long
Wow.
time.
I mean,
Paramount seems to have screwed over Star Trek for its 60th anniversary, but it is the anniversary of it. Doctor Who's coming up. I think it's 67 years this year. It's been going for a hell of a long time. Even things like Firefly is being brought back after one series decades ago. It's coming back in an animated form. Um, what do you think is the secret to the longevity behind some of these titles?
it's interesting. So it's not just, everything you mentioned, but also things if you're looking at Marvel, DC, if you're even looking at Pokemon, like Pokemon, people didn't expect it to have the kind of longevity it really did. And Pokemon just
Mhm.
had its 30th anniversary. Um, Part of that is, people, regardless, and I think Armageddon is a fantastic example of that. It's regardless of, people are in hard times and there's the fuel crisis, all of these things happening. But as humans, you want things that you can connect with. You want things that brings you joy. And a lot of the things like pop culture, gaming, sci-fi, anime, and all of those still brings people joy. And I think you kind of go through that cycle where kids are being brought up because their parents were really into it, and then they get really
Mhm.
into it, and then they are now in a position with potentially, some would maybe with disposable income, some in places where they're making decisions, etc. I mean, like who would have imagined that would have brought out like a live action movie for He-Man? Um, I'm still waiting for a live action Captain Planet, to be honest. We were just talking about that a couple of
Yeah,
days ago. Yeah.
that would be brilliant. The parody that Funny or Die did with that was absolutely spot on. Like, it's like there's so much potential here, and I think Don Cheadle would be brilliant in that role.
Yes. Yes,
He'd
I
be spot
agree.
on for it.
I agree. But also, it's wild to think that, now thinking back to things like Captain Planet, and you're like, oh, wow, I seem to have missed that whole thing where Whoopi Goldberg was the voice of Gaia.
She was?
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was Whoopi Goldberg. It was the voice of Gaia in
Oh,
Captain Planet. Yeah.
Oh my God. When you look back at something like Captain Planet, and you obviously being as a Green MP, how much of your ideology can you sort of trace back to shows like that?
It's interesting you mentioned it because a lot of the things, and people ask me this not just in terms of being a politician, but also in terms of a green politician, but also in terms of my academic background when it comes to
Hmm.
Egyptology. Because, like in terms of being a green MP and all of those, there are things that I draw on both in terms of growing up, I guess growing up in China, and certain shows I was exposed to when I was in China. And actually, Captain Planet was one of the shows that I started watching when I was in China. Um, but also, um, this show has such a special place in my heart. The Magic School Bus.
Oh, yes. Yep,
The
Miss
Magic
Frizzle.
School Bus and Miss Frizzle is probably who I would use as sort of that entryway into environmentalism.
Hmm.
I remember distinctly, there was the whole, all of the episodes around how the natural systems works, but also there was a particular, I think, Christmas episode they had, which was around recycling and plastic waste. And so, for a lot of kids and for a lot of people my generation, that was just a fantastic way of learning about everything around you, including the human body, including, just everything in a really accessible way. But I think in terms of Egyptology, people say, "Oh, you must have really like Indiana Jones." I mean, I wasn't really exposed to Indiana Jones as much growing up, but definitely the manga and anime series called Knights of the Zodiac or Saint Seiya was a huge influence for me, as well as Xena.
Have you met, because Lucy Lawless is a Green supporter, have you met Lucy?
Yes, I have, and I think it was really interesting when we were at the event, and I think some of the young people I mentioned to obviously didn't maybe grow up with Xena or understanding the cultural phenomenon that is Xena, and also the impact that Lucy Lawless and Xena have on pop culture, and they were like, "Oh, we don't really know who that is," and I'm like, "Are you kidding me? This is one of the few people in the world that has an asteroid named after her. You have no idea the importance
Hmm.
of this cultural icon." Yeah, so I think every time I meet Lucy Lawless or anyone that you kind of look up to. And then when you meet them and they're just a genuinely nice person. Most recently, I met the cast of Avatar, The Last Airbender, the voice actor and actresses, and they're just amazing people. And you're like, oh, it's so nice when the person is also got good vibes,
Hmm.
not just their character. Yeah.
Were you doing your Aang cosplay when you met them?
I did. I did do my Aang cosplay again, just for that, because they're there. And for the first time, I mean, I tried it kind of end of last year very briefly, but for the first time, probably in 50 years, I actually shaved. So I was fully,
Hmm.
fully committed to young Aang this time. And I'll send you a photo of me as Aang and Lan Pham, who's our environmental spokesperson, as Katara, who did an amazing job, and also Tiano Tuono, who is also one of our massive sci-fi geeks. And as budget Uncle Iroh, but Tiano's just have such an incredible Iroh vibe. If there's anyone in our caucus, I'm just like, yes,
Hmm.
he's just embodies that the chill uncle vibe of Iroh.
When you look at something like Avatar, which is a Western series that's done very well with that sort of Asian mix of storytelling, animation, the look and the vibe for it, and it feels very much like a blending of cultures. As somebody who is a migrant MP into the country, does that sort of resonate with you? Is that the kind of resonation that you'd like to see the public get with what you do and with that kind of content?
I think the definitely for for people who grew up with Avatar. So I didn't grow up with Avatar because by then I was already in my 20s when I watched Avatar. Um, but I would say definitely because Avatar was done really, really well. If you're looking at just in terms of the background to do with the martial arts that were used for that, they did a lot of research for that. Even the terms they were used in there. Um, and I think the big thing I remembered was the twin fish that was supposed to be, the kind of the avatars, the the sacred animals that taught the water tribes water bending. Their names are Tui and La, which means push and pull in Mandarin Chinese, and that very much is also the foundation of Tai Chi, or Tai Chi, which is the basis for water bending. So they really did their due diligence in terms of that particular show. And I think that show not only has a lot of resonance with the, the, the Chinese communities, the Asian communities here, but also Mali and Pacifica communities as well, because there's a lot of shared values with that as well. And I think even when we're going to Armageddon in Tamaki Makoto, um, and if I'm going as Aang, it is often the, people who are of either Asian or Mali or Pacifica background who are like, oh my God, it's Aang. And that's where the kind of the recognition came from. So it's really cool. And we might try something. It's kind of coming up soon, and we might try something this time round for Armageddon if we can get the costume together, because I would really like to go. At one stage, we thought about going as the entire cast of X-Men, but I think at this stage we also thought about maybe doing something that's more like Final Fantasy VII. We've been thinking about Final Fantasy VII.
That is there a group chat with all of you MPs going, right, Armageddon's coming up, these are our options, any suggestions?
We maybe, I mean, not a group chat specifically for Armageddon, but we do have group chats where we're like, okay, it's coming up, this is the theme we're going with. And so for example, when we said that we're going to go as sort of avatar themed for the Wellington Armageddon, I messaged Lan, I was like, Lan, you'll make a great Katara. Like, you are a freshwater
Mhm.
ecologist, you're the environment spokesperson, you'll be an amazing waterbender, you've got a look already. This is what she looks like, this is who it is. And I even sent her a little video of like, this is the martial art it's based on, just in case we need to do some
Mhm.
movements and etc. And yeah, and again, she did a fantastic job. Yeah.
So when you're sitting in the house, and obviously there's a lot of debate, a lot of research, a lot of late nights, how often do you sort of sit there and see what's put in front of you with a lens of, this is something I've seen on a show or something that I've come across in a narrative of a gameplay? Or, are there times that your brain makes in that space between pop culture and reality?
Yes. And this is um this is oh God, um such a niche reference. But in Final Fantasy 14, which is one of the games I play, and because I'm a big MMORPG player, that's kind of my predominant field of expertise, so to speak. I and just a small sidetrack. I actually referenced Final Fantasy 14 in my maiden speech. Part of that was a dare from a friend.
Hmm.
Um, and but genuinely there are some, again, like some good moments and good quotes. So in my maiden speech, I mentioned certain critically acclaimed MMORPG, which is the ad that that Final Fantasy 14 always uses. Critically acclaimed MMORPG Final Fantasy 14. Um, and I think in there, Heidelin, who's kind of the main kind of character in that, often talks about like, you know think, hear, feel, and it's part of the baseline of a lot of the protagonists and your character's progressions to the story. And I thought that actually is a really important trademark of what makes a good MP. You meant to be thinking, you meant to be hearing, you meant to be feeling. So I was like, and that's what I used in my maiden speech. But in terms of what you said, in Shadowbringer, which is two expansions ago for Final Fantasy 14, there is, hopefully this is not a spoiler, but it is two expansions ago. There is a particular antagonist, which is kind of a little bit like Jabba the Hutt kind of vibe to it, called Vothri. And in one of the dungeons called Mount Gog, um, he was seeing as kind of like this sort of, I guess, narrator voice as you're going through this dungeon, and he's kind of one of the main villain of that arc. And he was like, I am righteousness, and righteousness shall prevail, and and this kind of voice. And he sounds exactly like Shane Jones. And I've literally heard Shane Jones a few weeks ago saying that I am righteousness. And I'm like, oh my God, he is literally Vothri from Final Fantasy
Oh my
14. This is, yeah.
God.
So have a look. And yeah, so there are definitely moments in the house. I'm like, I feel like I'm in the Twilight Zone, or there's this strange sense of deja vu that we have been through this in a video game. Like, I have
Hmm.
just played this. I have the argument that the government makes on, and the kind of the misinformation or the lying that the government does. I'm like, I have literally just played this scenario in Final Fantasy 14.
Hmm.
So yes. The short answer is yes. There have been quite a few deja vu moments.
The one I tend to get is every time the government will pass something horrible, which I know happens a lot, but things like the disenfranchisement laws, for example, where they've made it harder for people to vote this year, and they're celebrating that they've done these things because that they're supposed to be very good for the people they want to take part in democracy. I've got a friend who will send me it's Padme sitting in the Senate in Star Wars, going, "So this is how democracy dies." Yeah, that's yeah, and I think he sent it to me a dozen times over the last couple of years. Like it's just it's this constant throwback. But I find pop culture is really good at creating these moments that people can relate to. When something happens, they can tie it back into. And I try and do it from time to time, but I also try and get. I know I get a lot of people who will comment going, "Why should I trust this 50-year-old with toys?" Which I always find a
Yeah.
really reductive argument and slightly offensive because I'm not 50. But I'm only in my mid 40s.
but
But they use it as an excuse to not take something seriously, which I find really fascinating. In terms of the work that you do, have you ever come across people who see it, who mention pop culture in a reductive way, or who bring it up in a negative way? Did people pick up those references, for example, in your maiden speech, and go, "Well, why would you do something like this?" Or was it more like, "This is actually a really cool little Easter egg"?
I actually think for the people, particularly within the kind of the gaming community and etc., if for those who um, feel like they're being seen, but also having MPs that genuinely understand the community, um, that is really valued. And that's one of the things when we go to Armageddon, often we get really good feedback. And, people will look at us and going like, oh my God, you are an MP, yet you are
Hmm.
just as needy and geeky as I am. And that representation is really, really important. But for those, particularly when you're looking at government or members of public, I think, those who have that kind of criticisms probably doesn't understand the references we're making in the first place. And so I've never really had that from people who dismisses pop culture or the references we make in pop culture. Um, I think even when we're talking about, for example, in one of the bills we just had, which is the online casino gambling bill, one of the amendment papers that my colleague Ricardo Menendez March put forward is around addressing the issue of loot boxing,
Hmm.
which does tie into this whole thing. And he was explaining, because it was me, Ricardo, and Fran, and with the three of us and plus Tiana, we're like the the nerd quartet of the Green Party caucus. Um, and so, we all understand loot boxing. So, but he has to explain to the House what loot boxing is. And when we're talking about it in the House, but also in general, like generally when I was talking about it in select committee or etc., people don't dismiss it, and people do actually pay attention, going like, oh, that's really interesting. I know that my kids do X, Y, and Z. I hesitate to think how much money they're spending on loot boxing, and I never associate that with gambling. Um,
Hmm.
so, but of course, the amendment wasn't supported and etc. But even then, people didn't go like, oh, what do you know, and kind of dismiss your credibility or underplace your credibility because of what you're interested in, what you're into. Um, so luckily we haven't had that yet, which is good. Yeah.
Are there people on the other side of the aisle that share a sort of love of pop culture that you've come across that you feel like they kind of don't get the message?
Um, Not as much. I think in the ones that those that I kind of um chat with on a regular basis. Normally it doesn't come up as much naturally. But no, I don't think it has really come up. But I also think that it's one of those things that regardless if you're talking about pop culture or not, we do find that I tend to find that now you can't really shut off your brain in a way that just isolates, now I'm kind of gaming, you're always kind of finding connections with your work. So there probably are people on all sides who would be, geeky or would be, into pop culture and all of those. None of them has really overtly, openly expressed it. And some of them might say, "Oh yeah, that's something I used to be into, but now I'm not into anymore." With the implication or that they're supposed to be a grown up, therefore it's not something that is interested in. Um, but I also feel like, if you're looking at some of the latest data around gaming, regardless of your age group, once a gamer, you're always going to be gaming. You're going to be playing games on your mobile. You're going to be, um, you know, doing, yeah.
I also know that there are some MPs out there, particularly on the other side of the aisle, where there are pop culture references used to denigrate them in some way. So, David Seymour as Rimmer from Red Dwarf comes to mind. People use that comparison between a horrible hologram on a sci-fi show to how David Seymour operates and his personality and stuff like that. Do you think that there is a risk in doing that? That minimizes the harm that might come from the messaging of a politician if you are tying in them to something like that character? Or is it a way of exploring what harm that politician is doing through a pop culture lens?
I think in general, I mean, I just gave an example of a video game character and tying it to a particular MP, but those are also the kind of things that, for example, I will make those connections, but I wouldn't necessarily like openly or publicly make that kind of association, because one of the things I recognize, for me personally, and this is just me, that every single MP gets attacked for a variety of different reasons by different groups. And if you go out of your way to kind of focus on MP, and this is the thing, I find that the ACT Party to be in many ways the most double, like two-faced in this regard, where they make a big fuss when they themselves are targeted, but then they're quite happy to target other MPs and members of public on their Facebook and live stream. And I always say that, you reap what you sow. So if you are doing that, understandably, other people are going to be doing that to you. But in general, for me, I would avoid doing that because I know what that would lead to and what that would result in. Um, but I can see why people would make that kind of connotation. It's a way for people to find a point of reference for a particular person in terms of, or a particular party in terms of their policy and in terms of their position. But I don't know if that necessarily would say, make light of that particular policy or make light of a particular issue or the harm that that particular MP or minister is doing. Because for the person making that reference, it's it's an important reference for them, and and they themselves would understand the magnitude of that, but maybe not everyone will get it, but that's okay.
And final question in this part for you. If we're looking at a utopian kind of future, which everybody wants, everything is awesome for everybody. what are some of the texts, the pop culture texts that you think all politicians should take a look at to maybe give them some ideas or some inspiration or some guidance in how we get there?
Ooh, that's a really good question. It really, I think it really depends on, like, if you want the text to be a cautionary tale, or if you want it to be more of a positive messaging. Um, I think just immediately off the top of my head, in terms of, let's say, cautionary tale, a lot of the things that we see in MMORPGs, and again, I go back to MMORPGs, are a really good example of, you know, what would happen if you don't put people and the planet at the center of all of the decision making, if you allow things to continue on. And the reason I mentioned, Final Fantasy VII is, the premise of that is, with Avalanche and Cloud and Tifa and Barrett, is that, that their city was being polluted, because of capitalists. Um, and that's the start of it. And a lot of other things, they discover more things as they go. But that was the initial premise of that. So there is a lot of cautionary tale. Another example I want to give is probably quite an old manga and anime series called X. This is probably, you're looking at something that was like late 90s. It's one of Clamp's first animation series, or manga series. Is currently, unfortunately, on permanent hiatus. That particular series addresses the issue of climate change back in the late 90s in a Japanese manga.
Mm-hmm.
So you get all of these sort of snippets of cautionary tales. But I think in terms of positive, like what something could be, um, I'm always weary of what people perceive to be sort of utopia or Elysium or anything like that, because, for example, if you're looking at the ending to The Good Place, they finally made it to the good place, and it's not what all they all signed up to be. So I think it's, for us, I'm thinking of an example where people could have positive reinforcement. And actually, it just occurred to me that Chris Bishop, I think, did actually make a cultural reference when we're talking about um, the changes a couple of weeks ago to the Auckland Unitary Plan, that particular
Mm-hmm.
bill. And it was talking about how the Greens just seems to operate in this kind of Sim City-like environment. And for me and Tam, we're talking about, we're like, actually, if this was Sim City, if we were doing it, it would have been three waters that was introduced, because we'll have clean drinking water, there will be
Mm-hmm.
adequate drainage, there will be public transport system for everyone. People will be having a higher satisfaction. You're always going to have issues with any sort of world that we live in, because we're seeing the damages recently of climate charge weather events and etc. and all of that. So we know that it's not going to be that sort of utopian event, but it's about whether, like SimCity, we're able to plan ahead to anticipate and making sure that decisions we make are going to have the people, and urban planning that we're doing, going to have people's best interest at heart. So I think in that sense, that's probably the best answer I can give at this stage. SimCity.
See, we actually studied when I was doing fifth form geography, so 1995. We did SimCity as a module for forward planning,
Yep.
and it's the mid '90s, so it's the original version of SimCity. But it was a great tool for being able to, if you put residential next to commercial where you've got, or industrial with pollution, that's going to cause like little things like that. That yeah, as a 15-year-old, you don't necessarily think about. As a 15-year-old in a rural community where I was, that was
Yeah.
not something that people considered as an issue. But as a teaching tool, it was really cool. And I would love to do like a local body election thing where you get candidates running for mayor to play SimCity for a day and just see how they do.
I actually think that for some of, I have heard that being done in other countries. I genuinely have
Mm.
heard that being done in other countries where you use SimCity as an example of, well, this is how you're supposed to be creating a city. The other example, and again, this is sort of when you're looking at how video games can be used for real world simulations in many ways. And um, is you've heard about the using, and this is back in kind of vanilla World of Warcraft, when they use World of Warcraft for pandemic simulation. There's a particular incident in World of
Hmm.
Warcraft to study pandemic response. Have you
That's
heard about
brilliant.
that one?
No.
So okay, so for context, what happened was in one of the in WoW, vanilla WoW, there was a particular raid, and then back then when we did 40 people raid, and again, I am making a plug for esport because we put so much money into sport, and they're like, oh, people are just playing on a computer. What's that for? And I'm like, first of all, you need to be healthy in body and mind when it comes to esport. You need to have a high level of
Hmm.
concentration, and also when people are talking about like, oh, if you're just doing a raid or etc., that's not really a team sport. I'm like, well, you try to coordinate 40 people. You only have one team of 12 or whatever you have on a sports team. You try to coordinate a team of 40 for a raid 4 nights a week across 3 different time zones. Like, good luck with that. Um, but in one of the original, I think, 40-man raids in World of Warcraft vanilla, there was a debuff for one of the bosses give, and there was a glitch, and that debuff supposed to go away when you leave the raid, but it continued on, and someone brought it into a major city like Ogoroma or Stormwind, and then that just created widespread carnage because NPCs and low-level characters were being killed off, and because it's contagious, it's being killed
Hmm.
off, and they couldn't complete their quests and do all of those. So it then created a system, again, a simulation to what happened in the pandemic. It created a system where you get healers who would like basically trail um like low level characters and then continuously like spam them with heal to make sure that they're high enough to hand in their quest and then be able to let the debuff go away naturally. You have people who just avoided major cities altogether and decided to just hide in the woods until it's all over. You get people who go around deliberately spreading, the pandemic and spread it to other people. But it just created a really interesting study case for how um, cities and countries and states should be dealing with pandemics.
Wow. That is brilliant. Was that before the pandemic?
Oh, this is back in like 2006, 2007. Yeah, well
So that
before the
data was
pandemic.
there the whole time.
Yep.
Oh my God. See, that's brilliant. Right. I'm going to run you through a quick test here that we're going to call the Kobayashi Maru. Now, I don't know if you've come across the title before. It pops up in
No,
pop
I have
culture a little
not.
bit. So
Yeah.
the Kobayashi Maru is actually in the Star Trek universe, the test that all officers have to take and you can't win. It is a no-win scenario. It is to teach officers that they can't always win whatever's happening in front of them. So it basically means there's no right or wrong answers here. It's just you're going to piss somebody off no matter how you answer these.
I love the
So
moral lessons that you get in both sci-fi and I think in
yeah,
gaming and all of those. Like I feel like more people should do that. Like
yes.
to be honest, more politicians should be exposed to things like this.
I'm
Yeah.
working on it one at a time. So I've got 12 questions here for you. They're really
Okay.
mostly relatively simple questions about various sci-fi pop culture titles.
Cool.
They're the standard sci-fi trope questions. So first one for you:
Yeah.
Star Wars versus Star Trek, which is better?
Um, Star Wars original, but otherwise, I like Star Trek for the variety, but I haven't watched all of the different kinds of Star Trek. Yeah, I like
Okay.
all of the different
Um,
manifestations.
there's so many of them. 60 years of it. So many of them. Um, Also, did you see Tawny Newsome is coming to Armageddon next weekend?
Yes, I did see that.
It's like,
I'm incredibly disappointed that Starfleet Academy got cancelled.
I
I actually
know.
really like it. It was really good. Yeah.
Yeah. See, I loved having Stephen Colbert as the voice of the digital dean. I just thought that was like spot on, perfect casting. Yeah. Marvel or DC?
Marvel all the way. I grew up with Marvel. Specifically, I grew up with X-Men. I think when you are a queer child, X-Men, particularly like when I was watching X-Men Evolution at that stage,
Hmm.
and also the original 97 X-Men, and after the X-Men Evolution, it gives you, sorry, this you said quick fire round.
That's
I will be
fine.
faster in future with future answers. But I think X-Men mention gives you this idea that, oh, you can be an outcast by the rest of the community and by general standards, but you can still be in a place where everyone kind of understands and respects and yeah, have that kind of familial feel. I always wanted to be like, if I were in that situation, wouldn't that be nice growing up? Yeah.
Nice. Batman versus Superman.
Oh, Superman. Oh, technically neither. I have issues. I feel like if Batman really wanted to help people, that he should just pay his fair share of tax. Um,
Yeah.
but in terms of Superman, Superman has certain complexities, and um, but I do feel the most recent Superman movie. I know I have never been a big fan of Superman movies. I did grow up watching Smallville, um, but I resonate the vulnerability of the Superman in the latest movie.
Okay. Kirk versus Picard.
Um, Picard,
Okay. Why
bold
didn't the Eagles just?
solidarity.
That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. Have you ever seen the test footage actually with him with the wig?
No.
When he first got cast, that Roddenberry wanted him to wear
Oh,
a wig and speak with a French accent.
that is
And there's
so
a great clip from, I
distressing.
think it was Graham Norton, where he's doing the boldly go where no one's gone before with a French accent, and it's wrong. It's so wrong,
So
and the wig just
distressing.
looks cheesy. It's just, yeah. If you're gonna have a captain with a wig, it has to be Kirk.
Yeah.
Why didn't the Eagles just fly to Mordor?
Why didn't the Eagles?
Just fly to Mordor. Why didn't the hobbits take the Eagles to fly to Mordor, drop the ring in that way? Aerial drop.
Oh my God. I feel like that's the kind of narrative devices where you're like, that's what they just have to do. I do feel like if they use the ego, they would be more obvious to attacks by Nazgul.
Okay.
Um, and I also feel like I'm not someone who's familiar enough with the lore of and what also the Eye of Sauron is capable of, but I feel like that the whole idea is that you have to go undercover. Although, like I said, like so many people have said, I love the idea of nine people traveling, the world trying to destroy an ugly piece of jewelry, and feel like that is the most queer coded thing ever.
Oh yes. Han or Greedo, who shot first?
Um,
Okay. Do Balrogs have wings?
yes, I'm just trying to think. My recollection is that the Balrog did have wings,
Okay.
bad wings, but
Yeah.
not, yeah.
Okay. Because there's only one line about wings in the whole trilogy. So some people are like, "Eh."
There's
um, PC or console?
really they didn't have wings.
Well, there's one line that says they do, and then the rest of the descriptions don't mention it.
But I'm just trying to think of the CG for Balrog and what
Yeah.
I thought that did. Oh wow, that's really interesting. Um,
Yeah.
console or PC? PC. I love the. I don't love the load time of PC. I
Hmm.
prefer and console I generally have better graphics, but PC is, yeah, it's more varied.
Yeah. Sub or dub?
Oh my God, I have to sub, never dub. I can't stand dub.
Okay. What would your starter Pokemon be?
Which generation? Or just any?
Any.
Ooh, God, this is no, now this is way too hard, way too hard. Oh my God. I'm like thinking of all of the different, I'm like, my brain is currently doing that sort of like the map of like, but what about the finite evolution? And I like the looks of this particular one, but in terms of type and element combinations, what I'm gonna do. Um, oh, I I probably would go, this is gonna be maybe controversial, maybe, but at this stage, the first thing that popped into my mind is Poplio. And the reason is Primarina is just such a diva. Even though I am pro grass type in general, when I play a game,
Mhm.
I want to go with the grass starter. Um, I'm looking forward to Gen 10 of Pokemon, but I have to say the grass starter did not wow me. I do like the sassiness of the water starter. And I think my friend who loved the Pomeranian fire dog starter, um, I think one day I can't remember what she said. She said something, and I'm like, I hope that fire starter grows into final evolution in some sort of bipedal monstrosity just for you. And she was like, "Why would you curse me like that?"
Yeah. Oh my God, that's horrible. Um,
I know,
Outside of
but
Lord of the Rings,
Ninetales
and I
is
think I
my
know the
favorite.
answer to this one. What do you
Yeah,
think is New Zealand's biggest contribution to pop culture?
Xena.
Yeah, I figured that would be the answer. That makes sense.
Um, but also, I mean, not just Xena, but I also think that, for example, another good one is probably Path of Exile,
Hmm.
if you're looking at it from a gaming perspective.
Nice. And then last question: which Doctor is the best?
Number, I'm gonna say number 10, David Tennant. No, David
Okay.
Tennant is 9. David Tennant 9 or 10? Is 10 Matt Smith?
I think it's if you just say one of the David Tennants, you'll land there somewhere because he's done it twice, and then after he did it, they introduced another
True,
one that was a retroactive introduction. Yeah, so
true.
we can stick with David
Um,
Tennant.
I have to say, oh God. Um, I liked the Doctor. But in terms of kind of dynamic, the dynamic between David Tennant's Doctor and Donna was great. But I feel
Yeah,
like the what I found most memorable and was Matt Smith's Doctor with Karen Gillian's character name, who just blanked on.
Amelia Pond.
Amelia Pond. And I think Matt Smith is his doctor, and Amelia and that whole storyline with River Song was really, really good. I really enjoyed that. That for me was probably peak. And actually, I would say one of the things that River Song said to the doctor during one of those is something that I continue to remember. Again, pop culture reference that I think is really applicable in a political situation. I think River Song said something like, "But remember, doctor, the higher you rise, the harder you fall," or something along the line of that. And that for me has always been an incredibly memorable quote.
You know Matt Smith's in the country at the moment.
No, why?
He's here filming a movie.
But I mean, a lot of them comes here to film movies.
Yeah,
I have to say that this is okay. This is off script.
it's fine.
The other thing that obviously I'm incredibly into is K-pop, which is a whole other subset of pop culture that is kind of gaining phenomenon. But for me, like Gen 2 K-pop with your Girls' Generation, 2NE1, Super Junior, Shine, and Wonder Girls, that for me is like my generation. Um, but you see elements of New Zealand in movies, and that's not really surprising. But when you see Auckland in particular, like urban
Hmm.
Auckland in movies, that's incredibly memorable. And the two example I want to give is in a really terrible, I think, B grade movie called Avalon High. It's a high school sort of drama. It's a remake of the King Arthur theme, but the main
Mhm.
character is a high school student, supposed to be in America, but it's filmed in New Zealand. And they made University of Auckland and the Clock Tower um, pretend to be high school entrance,
Mhm.
and they I was working at the old government house at University of Auckland at the time. I remember they blocked the roads of Princess Street for the filming because they have to look like the cars were driving the other way.
Mhm.
And then you see her running around Albert Park and Britomart and pretending it's somewhere in California, and it's just the weirdest thing for me. And that was really memorable for me. And the other thing that was really memorable for me was in one of Taeyeon, who is the leader of Girls' Generation, when she came out with her, I think her first solo single called I didn't realize it was filmed in Auckland. And then, the first scene started, and I'm like, oh, that looks beachy. That looks like Piha, but no, that can't be right. And then I kept watching, and I'm like, why does everything look so familiar? And then I saw a scene which is walking down Kingsland,
Mhm.
and I'm like, I recognize that ugly, ugly parking meter anywhere that is Auckland.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's moments like that. And I'm like, I wonder what it feels like to live somewhere where you're constantly seeing your local neighborhood on screen, because we simply don't do that here. Even though you're filming for things like Lord of the Rings, but they're not your local neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't live down the road from Mount Doom, but I also Guns Akimbo, because I remember I saw that actually just before the pandemic hit. Me and a friend went along to it, and there's just one random scene with the sky towers in the background. It's like, well, yeah, that can't be filmed anywhere else. And Megan was another one, like that's the foyer in AUT, and just going, I know exactly where that is.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. Megan
Oh
was shot here.
wow. Yeah.
There was that. Was it Sweet Tooth, the Netflix series about the little boy with the antlers?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That was shot there, and there was a scene in the I think it's the very end of the first season where they're walking past Rainbow's End, and I'm just like, I know where that is. And there's a scene in I think the second season where there's a plane that flies in and is dropping bombs, and I'm just sitting there going, okay, yeah, I know exactly where that is in town. Like there's an EB Games, or there was an EB Games down there, and it's so weird when you can click and go, that's ours, like that feels like ours.
But also, like the other example is because I mean there's a lot of varying stars, and I know that Star Wars versus Star Trek, is often the popular comparison. Of course, you then get Star Trek versus Babylon 5 and Deep Space Nine,
Hmm.
and all of those. But then one thing that people haven't actually talked about, which is another thing that I kind of watched some parts of it, um, and I kind of want to go back and maybe go back and watch it again, is Stargate. Um,
It's the original Stargate's out on Netflix now.
yes. But the thing was, I first started watching, I kind of went in a very weird order. I kind of went from Stargate Atlantis and then went
Hmm.
back to Stargate, and then the original Stargate movie with I think, no, it wasn't William Shatner. Um, what's
Kurt
his
Russell,
name? Was it
Kurt
Kurt
Russell, and
Russell?
James Spader in the
James
original
Spader,
movie.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, um, did you know about the fun Egyptology fact in the original movie?
No.
Okay, there are two. Um, in the original Kurt Russell and James Spader movie, when they got Danny Jackson, they were like, "Oh, we need you to translate this particular hieroglyph and etc. And then and the hieroglyphs and the Egyptian language," because he was a archaeologist slash Egyptologist, and he saw it and he was like, "Who did this translation? Budge." E. A. Willis Budge is probably one of the more well-known Egyptologists, but he's also known as probably one of the worst translators ever. And he's from the early 1920s, and back then he basically went with, "This is how I think this should be translated, and I'm gonna try and mold the words and the Egyptian language in a way that fits the outcome that I want to see. Very much like this government's policies.
I was going to say treaty
Um,
principles, Bill.
Treaty Principles Bill, or anything that's related to education. Um, and so, that was a really cool Easter egg for Egyptologists. And the other thing is, and because it's Kingsley, and Ben Kingsley is everywhere, when they went onto the planet and then they saw Ben Kingsley and they offered them the chocolate bar,
Hmm.
and he said, Bener, Benewi. Bener is the Egyptian word for sweet. And Benawi, which although is in Egyptian grammar, it's a duality form, but it's also the way they refer to how. So basically, he literally said, sweet, how sweet.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And that's
Is it,
actually ancient Egyptian. Well, Middle
how
Egyptian.
do we know what ancient Egyptian sounds like? Is it through that evolution of language, or is there a bit of a
No, we don't, unfortunately. So, if you know, you just now opened up a new can of worms. You have now unlocked the next tier of achievements. Um, which is I love linguistics.
Mhm.
And if you know modern Afro-Asiatic or Semitic languages like Arabic, for example, they don't have vowels. They have sort of
Mhm.
consonants and have pseudo vowels. And in Arabic, when you're learning Arabic, you will use accents essentially that indicates vowel. Ancient Egyptian also didn't have vowel, so it's in that sense it's very similar to Arabic. You have pseudo consonants like a pseudo a pseudo O/U, a pseudo I, and a pseudo A/E. So it depends on where you are based and where you're from and which Egyptology lineage you come from. You will translate based on the convention that you would have used. But because there are no real vowels, we don't really know what they sound like. What the convention that Egyptologists would use is if you have sort of consonants next to each other without a pseudo vowel in place, you will artificially insert an e. So for when you're talking about the word for sweet, like banner, you would, in the hieroglyph itself, would just be BNR. And then Egyptologists artificially will insert E between the consonants and use BENER. But that may not be the case historically. But it's also one of the reasons why traditionally it's very hard for you to have consistency in spelling in English because of the lack of vowels. So this is why even in modern Arabic you see Muhammad spelled in a variety of different ways. You
Mhm.
see Ahmed spelled in a variety of different ways. And it's the same thing when it comes to king names. Often you will have some of them that's being spelled differently than others. There's also been a movement of moving away from the traditional um, Hellenistic spelling, or as in spelling based on Greek conventions, and going back to the original Egyptian conventions. So, for example, um, for rather than for the gods, you have Osiris or Isis. You will have Uzir and Iset. For kings, rather than Tutmosis, you use Tutmosis. Rather than Amenophis, you'll use Amenhotep. So yeah, so they're also now starting to shift away from some of the older conventions for spelling. But
So
the S
they're
ending is a Greek
decolonizing the
thing, not an
language.
Egyptian thing. Well, they're doing their best to decolonize the language. To a certain extent, and even in terms of Egyptology, when you're learning about the locations, often you do need to learn the ancient Egyptian name, the Greek name, and also the modern name, which could be three very different names. um, and but yeah, like anything you will see in Egyptian that has a S ending, or names with the S ending, either for gods or kings, often it's to do with how the Greek version of that name came about, as opposed to the original Egyptian name.
Is that down to the translation then that you'd get on the Rosetta Stone? Because that was Greek and Egyptian, wasn't it?
There was Greek, Egyptian, specifically late Egyptian hieroglyphs,
Mm.
and also Demotic. So those are the three languages. But I think the way that you another way that you will see the language itself is being decolonized. And to be honest, Aotearoa, like our Egyptology department, and also parts in Australia, are in many ways leading some of that in terms of decolonization, because we, again, through things like Titiliti or Waitangi, we understand the impact of colonization a lot more, and we're more attuned to seeing when something is a colonized terminology. So, for example, you get the decolonization of names, but also decolonization of translations. The main translation and dictionary that Egyptologists used for decades is R.O. Faulkner, Raymond Faulkner's dictionary. And but the thing is, when you have the early Egyptologists, they are aristocrats, they are wealthy Brits, wealthy Americans who, particularly for Brits, they've gone to Egypt to escape the wet weather of the UK because of pneumonia and health reasons. They go to Egypt and they're like, this is so dry, so lovely here. Might as well do some looting. And so they then, but they're still shaping their translation based on their perception of their unconscious bias. So in ancient Egypt, in the dictionary, you will translate things like maid and butler, and that comes from a terms that you use in the aristocratic class. But then in
Hmm.
ancient Egyptian, it just says male servant, female servant, but it doesn't necessarily state class. Whereas in a traditional Egyptian society, if you're looking at Downton Abbey or etc., butler and maid have very specific class systems within the household hierarchy. So things like that, things like the term for harem, which is again an orientalization of ancient Egypt, terms like God, because in Egypt, God doesn't necessarily have the same connotation as how we would consider God, because in ancient Egypt, you could have a living God, you could have a dead God. And that kind of idea of a God could die and is not immortal, um, even though they are magical and non-living beings and etc. It's a weird concept to associate that kind of divinehood to. So there's all of these really cool things that's happening within classics and ancient history. And again, this is where we're looking at if our curriculum, talking about politics, if our curriculum and our education system doesn't understand or embed this idea of Titiliti Waitangi and the requirement to decolonize and re-indigenize, it then we don't see the growth of some of these disciplines, which traditionally is considered elitist or archaic as well, because you could actually do a lot with a decolonizing theory or re-indigenizing theory, even when it comes to things like classical studies. We've just simply continues to interpret classics and ancient history through the lens of the white elitist class of that particular generation. And so again, if we don't fund it, if we don't fund arts and humanities, if we don't fund continue to make sure that classical studies and history and etc. is robust within the curriculum with proper consultation, we're going to see the perpetuation of that elitist perception of those kind of disciplines.
That's brilliant. I think it's a great place for us to wrap everything up. This has been, as always, incredibly enlightening. So thank you very much, Lawrence. You will be at Armageddon over the weekend, the whole weekend?
Yes, definitely. We will be there for all 3 days. And like I said, we shall see what the cosplay is going to be. But regardless, we do have, like I said, for a lot of us who may not be able to go, because again, understanding that everyone might have the time or the capacity to cosplay, we do have these sort of like really cool and geeky t-shirt. This is Pikachu as the avatar, which is super cute. Um, and so we're gonna be definitely going there. We just simply love Armageddon. Absolutely love Armageddon.
Brilliant. Well, I will catch you there. Where can people find you online?
The best way to get a hold of me is either via Instagram or email me. And again, if anyone's got any suggestions on games that we should be playing, or even just like, did you think that this character is very similar to this, or just even like I said before, fun, quotes and etc. from your favorite TV show, your favorite game, your favorite movie, etc. Message me. I would love to hear that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for sticking around till the end of the video. While you're here, why not hit that like button or share the video or even subscribe to the channel. You could even become a paid YouTube member so you can see things released in advance, you get access to some exclusive content, and like all these awesome people, you get to have your name at the end of the credits as well.